All right, everybody. This is Steve Bishop from Woz U, and today we're going to be talking about array exceptions in Java. So an exception, as some of you may know, is essentially where when your application is running, there is some sort of problem that happens. There's some sort of error that occurs. And we typically try to catch those exceptions in a try-catch block. What this video is more or less about is just kind of exploring some of the little pitfalls of what would cause an exception when you're working with arrays in Java. So I've went ahead and created a project. Let me go ahead and switch over to, first of all, I want to show you that the code that I'm about to show you is actually posted up on GitHub. You can find it at github.com/xipoo/Java Spring Workshop _4-20-18. So this is the workshop specifically for today. And the day that this is recorded is, of course, for 2018. So it kind of makes it easy to find this particular bit of code. So you're going to find that you can just go ahead and clone this, and you can run it in your Spring tool suite, okay? And you'll be able to run into all the same problems that I'm going to run into. So first of all, let's go ahead and just run our application here. I'm going to close the console window just for a second here. We'll go ahead and run our application as is, and we're going to see right out of the box we are going to have an exception, okay? We're getting a java.lang array index out of bounds exception 3 at com.wozu workshop name collector.name_collector.add name collector.java 13, and of course at com.wozu workshop app main. Now what we're seeing here is what we call a stack trace. It's what did the application try to do? Where was it at, and where were the different calls it was trying to make when it ran into this issue? And then more specifically, where then did the error pop up? What line of code on which class was the actual problem? So I'm just going to expand out my folder system here so we can see what's inside of the source folder. And we'll notice that there are two packages here. I have one that is the com.wozu workshop and one called com.wozu workshop.nameCollector. So the purpose of this particular application as I wrote it is just basically a way to add names and display them to the console window. Nothing really special here. I've got a single class called nameCollector. It sits inside of this package here, com.wozu workshop nameCollector. So I got the nameCollector Java or class here, and inside of it, we'll see that there's basically there's going to be a constructor, okay, and the constructor is going to set this private internal variable here of a string array called names. It's going to set the first 3 values of 0, 1, and 2, the index of 0, 1, and 2, and set them to Abby, Steve, Abby, and Luke. Then we have a function on nameCollector where we can add a name, and we just pass in a string. And what this will do is just go find the current length of the names and add, set the new name to that particular spot in the array for whatever the next number would be. And then we also have a remove name function on here, which will actually remove a name possibly, which really it's just set to do a do loop, and if it finds the one that the name matches, then it goes ahead and just sets it to null. And then we have a get names. Now this is not necessarily how you would set up a typical scenario of how to manage arrays. In fact, this is how you wouldn't do it, because the whole purpose of this is to show you some ways that we can use arrays incorrectly. So what I'm going to do is then in my app.java, which is where my public static void main function is, so this is our entry into the application, is going to go and create a new instance of that name collector. It's going to add a name of Tina to it, okay? And then it's going to get all of the names out of the name collector and set it to a local variable here called names. And then it's just going to simply do a while loop and print out each one of the names that's inside of that array. So whatever we've been storing in our name collector, let's go get those names. You know, the get names function is going to return the array of names, and then we're just going to do a while loop over them. So that's the purpose of this application, but we see here that we have a problem every time that we try to run it, right? We get the same errors over and over again. Array index out of bounds exception 3, so that's the amount, that's the index, okay? And remember that arrays are constructed so that arrays have an index that's 0, 1, or 2. Now in this case, it's trying to add 3, or it's trying to use the array number of 3. And it's not working. And more specifically, it even tells us exactly where that is happening. It's on namecollector.java 13. And even kind of interesting here is you can actually click on that particular spot down here in your console window, and it takes you and highlights that exact error, right? Where that error is occurring. So we can see then that when we try to add 3 to this names, it's not working. And that's because what we're trying to do is we already have a string here, a string array of 3. And that's simply not going to work. Let me just move that out of the way. So we can't add another name to this list the way that we've done it here, okay? And I'm not really going to go through the process. I want you, as part of the workshop, to go figure out how to solve this code, okay? I wrote this code to be broken. I'm not going to show you how to fix it because otherwise it's not really a workshop. The whole point of this is to write code that fixes the problem. But what I am going to go through at this point is to show you basically how we know that there is that there is a problem here. Okay, how can we detect where the problem is? How can we see more explicitly what the error is? We know that it's name collector Java 13. We obviously know that, right? So something is happening on this line, and it's coming from app Java 9. So when this call is made here, there's an error. And this is a nice little way of just like clicking through and just kind of you know, seeing what is going on. We can just click on the thing and see exactly where the error is. But what I really want to show you is how we can actually watch line by line as the code is trying to be ran, what the different values are, and kind of flow step by step through the code. And the way that we do that is through a debugger. Okay, you've probably heard the term debug your code. And what we're really talking about is you can set something called a breakpoint, a specific spot in your code where you want to inspect everything inside the code at that particular point. So I'm going to actually set a breakpoint in my code, and we will see that the code will stop. The process, the code that I am running, will pause at the spot where I set the breakpoint. So there's a couple ways you can set a breakpoint. I like to just simply double click here on the left-hand margin next to the numbers that we see here. I'm going to double click in the margin here at line 8, and you'll see that there's a little blue dot here now, and that is actually what we call a breakpoint. Now I can change this. If I right click in the same spot there, I can actually select toggle breakpoint or disable breakpoint. You can also see that I could hit Control-Shift-B or Shift double click in order to disable or toggle the breakpoint. So I just prefer double clicking, and to toggle that breakpoint off, I can just simply double click on it again, and you can see the dot goes away. So I'm going to go ahead and double click next to line 8. Now, if I try to run this in my regular, by just clicking on run, you're going to see we still get the exception and nothing really happened. It's almost as if I didn't set the breakpoint. Well, that's because that's not actually attaching the process to a debugger. We have to use this one here. We have to use this line, this button right here, which actually attaches the debugger to our code. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the debug button here, and you'll see that when this runs, we're going to get a request to change perspectives. So this kind of launch is configured to open the debug perspective when it suspends. This debug perspective is designed to support application debugging. It incorporates views for displaying the debug stack, variables, breakpoints management. Do you want to open this perspective now? And I'm going to go ahead and click yes, and you'll see that we get a completely different window in our Spring tool suite. And don't get freaked out. It's easy to go back to where we were, but this window is more or less specifically designed to show us the variables that we have, and we can even navigate to the different breakpoints that we might have and where we're at in our code. We can see threads, which isn't really important to understand right now. Right now, we're just writing code that just uses one thread. We're not doing any multi-threading, but we can see where we're at in the code. App main string line 8. That's exactly where we are, and it's even highlighted down here. We can see right where it's at. We also continue to have the console window here, but we've got a lot of really good information. Now, if I click on the resume or F8 key on my keyboard, this will essentially just run the application as if, okay, you paused and then I just went ahead. And it moved on until it found an issue where we actually ran into a problem. Okay, it's going to run into an issue here. And we're going to see exception thread main index out of bounds exception. We see the same exception with JWT unable to get JNI environment. I think that's something we don't really need to worry about right now. What I really just want to focus in on is how we can use this debugger to navigate through our code. So I'll once again go ahead and click on the debug button to start our application again, and notice that we're going to pause back at the same toggled breakpoint, the same breakpoint we were at. And we can see our args parameter, which shows up in the variables because it's really kind of a variable, but that's that args string array. We can see that the arguments that were passed into the application when we started it, there's nothing in there. There's no values inside of the string array, and so we don't need to really worry about it. Now, line 8 is not actually ran yet, okay? So there is no name collector variable just yet. If I click on this one, which is the step into, or F5 on your keyboard, then this will actually run the next line of code, which we see takes us to the name collector class. Because what happens when you new up a new instance of a class, like what we're doing here on line 8 of our app.java, we're creating a new instance of a name collector. And when we create a new instance of a class, we run the constructor of the class. So there is code in our class that is going to run, and we can see it jumps now because we hit F5, so we're stepping. We're going line by line through the code, and we can see name collector constructor. This one is the one that's being called. And if we do, I'm just going to go ahead and hit F5 here. We can see that we can just step through the code, and it's going to set those values for each one of those inside of the array. And if we look in the names array, so if I expand on this, we can see here's the names private variable. And we can see there's a string with 3 items in it. We can even expand this out a little bit further. We can see each one of these individually, what each one of the values inside of the array is. So we can kind of use the debugging tools here, this perspective, to look at and inspect the values that are being set on all of these variables. And we can see that we have, of course, we have 3 items, index 0, 1, and 2, Steve, Abby, and Luke. The total size limit of our string for our names variable is 3. Now, if we continue going forward, so I'm going to hit F5 on my keyboard here. And now, everything as far as the instantiation of that new collector class and assigning it to the name collector, I'm sorry, I said new collector, the new name collector class, and assigning that instantiation to this name collector variable, all of that worked fine. There was no problem with the constructor function. Okay, all the code that we have to construct the name controller class or name collector class worked beautifully. Let's continue on. So the next line of code that our application wants to run is this name collector.add name Tina. So let's see what happens when we try to do this. So we're going to jump back into name collector, And notice that since we called the add name function, if I just go back here to app.java, we called this add name function on our name collector object. And we can see, if we go back to the name collector, this is the line that we're currently at, has not been executed yet. We're still not doing anything. We're paused before we run this code. And we can see what the new name is. I can even hover the mouse over this new name variable and see what's inside of it, as well as, of course, I can look in the variables up here. But if I hover the mouse over it, I can see the value is Tina. Oh, it looks like it's an array, actually, because a string is really just an array of characters. That's interesting. So if you really want to know what's in there, you can even see it's an array of characters. Tina, making up the word Tina. Okay, so Tina is going to be added to our names.length. Right now, if I hover the mouse over names, we can see there's 3 values in there. There's even the values printed out nicely for me. So what happens then if we try to go ahead and add this new name of Tina to our array? Well, now we can see thread dispatch uncaught exception throwable line. Okay, so we can see that this is where the problem happens. We've got this array index out of bounds exception. We can even click on this to expand on it. We can see some message information. And again, an exception is an object in Java. So if you haven't heard that before, an exception, including an array index out of bounds exception, these are objects with properties on them, just like any other class or any other object, okay? And we can see the detailed message is 3, and we can look more in depth at the values if we really wanted to. But the bottom line is we can see some really nice information about this particular issue and when it happens, right? We can see exactly when it happens. When we try to do that, we lost our stuff. It ran this thread dispatch uncaught exception, a throwable line not available. It clearly ran into some sort of problem. And we can see the array index out of bounds exception that was created by when we tried to run this add name method, okay? It threw the exception. So it threw an exception when it tried to run this. We don't have any sort of try catch block around this. So there's no way for our application to handle this array index out of bounds exception. And as a result, if we try to continue on through the code, it terminated, right? Our code just stopped right there, and we can see the error messages that we are getting. Now, I could wrap this up in a try-catch block. Now, this isn't really the reason or the purpose for this. I'm just going to do a try. And I'm just doing this so that we can move on. But we're going to catch that exception. It's an array index out of bounds exception. Oops, already got one. And we'll just do something like, we'll just do a system dot, oops. Now this is getting a little difficult to work with because I'm not really in my same perspective, right? This might be a little difficult to work with. So maybe what I'll do here, and I wanted to show you this anyway, is I want to change my perspective back to just a regular Java perspective. So if I go up to Window and I go down to Perspective, I can open a perspective and just select the Java perspective. And this will just basically take me right back to my normal console window and my class, you know, my main way that I view in my IDE. So, all right, so let's do, now I've got this exception. What do I want to do with the exception? Let's beautify this a little bit. What do I want to do with the exception? Well, I want to do a system.out.println, and we'll just say can't add another name. We'll just do that for now, okay? That way, what that should do is get rid of our error, right? We're gonna just print out, can't add another name. So when it tries to add that, we're just gonna catch it and we're just gonna print out something, but our application will move on. It'll keep going, okay? And just to prove that, once again, I still have my breakpoint up here on line 8 of app.java, right? I still got my breakpoint there. So we'll just go ahead and run the debugger again. I'm gonna go ahead and remember my decision this time to open up the debug perspective. So we'll go ahead and click on yes, and it'll change my perspective back. And we'll go through again. So we'll do F5, just continue on. Okay, so there's where we add the 3 names as part of the constructor of our name collector. And now we're gonna try to add Tina, which of course is going to be caught as an exception. And since the exception type here in my catch block matches the exception that was thrown when I tried to add that extra name, it's going to be caught by the catch block. And then of course, if we just try to see what happens next, we can see we just simply print out to the console window of can't add another name. All right, so we're good, right? So let's just keep on moving here. Now the next line of code after trying to add Tina will still continue, right? We're gonna continue to add. So here we're gonna get the names from our name collector, and we're gonna return the names. So now our names array, and I can hover the mouse over this again, we can see there's Steve, Abby, and Luke. But again, Tina is not in here because when we tried to add Tina, we ran into a problem. So int I, we're gonna do this int and a while loop here to see if we can figure out what the names are, right? And print them out. And I got a special little while loop here that's just gonna increment I by 1 after, now this is a little tricky. I did something here that you guys may not have seen. You guys might be wondering, where is Steve's I increment inside the while loop to prevent an infinite loop? And I did it a little tricky here. I put it actually inside of the while evaluation. And what this does, as long as I put the plus plus after, then that means it will change I by 1 after it does the evaluation to see if it is less than or equal to. So I'm actually increasing I by 1 after the evaluation, not before, but I'm doing it after. You might want to double check and look up what's the difference between plus plus I and I plus plus, because there is a difference. And this is one of those cases where I'm being a little sneaky here. So we're going to check to see if I, and I can prove this by the way, if I hover mouse over I, we haven't gone through this line of code yet, right? We don't see I anywhere here in the variables. So we haven't evaluated that line yet, but we will on this next line. So now we have I, and it's set to 1. Now, is I still 1? If we hit F5, it is now 2, but it's afterwards, right? I is now 2 after the line is executed, all right? And I could prove that by doing a console print or a system.out print line, but I'm not really going to get into that right now. Just trust me, okay? I is being incremented here on, after line 12 is completely executed. Now, system.out.println names, we're going to print out, Luke. Was that the first name? No. First name was Steve. What's going on here? Well, I incremented I, didn't I? Okay. All right. So maybe there's some, maybe my little trick here is not as good as I thought. Now we're going to 3. Wait. Dispatch uncaught exception, array index out of bounds exception. Why is that? Why did we do that? Well, let's take a look once again. We'll do F5 again to just kind of step through, and we can see what happened here. Well, exception in thread main, array index out of bounds exception 3, app, this time it's happening at app Java line 13. So when it's trying to run this line of code, 3, remember we had the same exact problem the last time when we were trying to add Tina? We were trying to add Tina to the index of the array at 3. Now we're trying to get the value out of that same position, but it doesn't exist. So it's throwing the same error. But we don't have the try catch block around it this time. So it's not going to work, is it? So I could, of course, put a little try catch block around this as well. I'll just go ahead and do that for right now. But trust me, you might want to come up with a different way to handle this. Maybe a better resolution to this than just trying to do a try catch. Now, what could I catch? Well, I could just try to catch an exception. That's a little different than I did last time, right? Last time I caught the whole specific name, right? If we went to go look at when we tried to add the name, so if I go to name collector, we wrapped the transaction here in a try catch, and we caught the full name of the exception. But this time, I'm not going to catch that specific array exception. I'm just going to catch any exception. Okay, and the reason for that, the reason why this works is because array index out of bounds exception inherits from this exception class. So exception class is actually a class that all exceptions inherit from. So if I want to catch any exception that might happen in my try catch block, I can just catch exception, and any type of exception that comes in, this particular catch block will get. However, if this attempt to add a name to the array through any other kind of exception besides array index out of bounds exception, I would not catch it because it doesn't match the parameter of array index out of bounds exception. And it would continue to actually make our application halt, and this try catch block really wouldn't work. So it's always a good idea to be as specific to these exceptions as you can, but there are some times where it makes sense to catch just general exceptions, you know, for any possibility. So I could say we're going to do a system.out.println, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to say on that exception object, I want to, let's go ahead and get the let's get the message. Okay, what is the message? We'll just go ahead and throw that. So we'll go ahead and save that. And that's what we're going to go ahead and print out if we get an error. All right, let's try debugging our code one more time. And we'll just step through it by hitting F5 multiple times. I'm just going to keep on going here. I'm just going to keep on pressing it. All right. Here we're in our while loop, so we get Luke, and we throw in an exception, and we get for a message of 3. And that may not be the most helpful message. Maybe we need to pick something else, but essentially we got the error message of 3. And if I wanted to see what's exactly inside of that exception, we'll go through it one more time here, and we can actually inspect the EX argument right there, and we can take a look at the actual exception object that is being thrown when we try to do this operation. Okay, so we can see a detailed message of 4. There's a stack trace. What's the cause? We can see the cause, detailed message, suppressed exceptions, stuff that's not really supposed to be shown, but we could if we really, really wanted to, that sort of thing. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you here is that you can actually add multiple catches to your code. So you can catch for specific exceptions. And in this case, since I know the exception that's going to be thrown, it's going to be the same one that I have here, I'm just going to go ahead and catch this, the same catch, and I'm going to put it before. So if it matches this specific exception of array index out of bounds exception, I'm going to actually print there is no name here. Okay, so if it matches the specific array index out of bounds exception, I'm going to go ahead and put a message in the console that says there is no name here. But if any other exception were to happen when I tried to do this line of code, so like let's say I tried to print out something and it just print line didn't work for whatever reason, I would catch it in this exception because it wouldn't match the array index out of bounds exception. So now if I try to run this again, we're going to go ahead and again just do the debugger. Yeah, we need to save everything. Forgot to save it first. Okay, so let's go ahead and step through. So we'll do F5. add our collection of names here, or our array of names. We're going to add another name of Tina, but we're going to see the message that we can't add another name because we hit an array index out of bounds exception. And now we're going to try to get the names. We're going to return those. And we get Luke just fine, but then we catch, oh, look at that. We hit the array index out of bounds exception. So therefore, we're going to see there is no name here. Okay, and then when we try to do it again, we're going to get the same one. There's no name here, etc. Now, there is a way that this code is written that is completely wrong, totally wrong. I broke it on purpose. You guys can go to the GitHub repository, go get the code as I have written it here, and you can go fix it yourself. That's what I want you to do, is go fix it. And again, let me just bring over the URL here for you guys to review this. It is going to be found at github.com/XIP000 Java Spring Workshop _4-20-18. And if you go there, you can go ahead and just clone this to your computer, try to run it in Spring Tool Suite, and you're going to run into the same exception errors that I've shown you. So there you guys go. I hope you guys had a wonderful time. I hope you guys are enjoying your time here with us at Woz U. If you have any questions, if you have any comments or anything, and you need some help or additional assistance, please don't forget to check in the announcements for how you can contact your instructor and set up an appointment with them to reach them during regular office hours. And also you can catch our other workshops that we do here at Woz U. Thanks for participating, guys. See you later.